Welcome to the course on church history. I'm Dr. Stephen Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies. And you get a lot more courses, information, charts we use at www.bibleandscience.com. In the background, you can see the great Church of Sophia in Istanbul. In this church history course, we want an overview of church history starting at the very beginning, the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2, and then going all the way up to the present time. We won't spend much time on the book of Acts because that's also covered in the session on New Testament survey. Here is a good overview of church history. They all start with P's to help you remember. First we have Pentecost, when we have the birth of the church, the apostolic age. Then we have persecution, around 64 to 313 A.D. Then we have the political union of church and state, starting with Constantine. Then we have the Pope's power and prosperity. Then we have the Protestant Reformation, 1517 A.D. And then we have Pietism and revivals from the 16th to 20th century. And then lastly we have postmodernism in the 21st century. So we want a quick overview of church history. The apostolic age, the book of Acts, from 33 to 64 AD. The key verse for the book of Acts is chapter 1, verse 8. It tells us to go into Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth with the gospel. And so this is a good outline for the book of Acts. You have Judea, Acts chapter 1 through 7. We have the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2. We have Stephen being stoned in Acts chapter 7. And from this stoning, it scatters the church into Samaria, and then we have Paul's missionary journeys going into the uttermost parts of the earth, Acts 13 through 28. Here we have a nice chart of the overview of church history in the book of Acts in the New Testament. First of all, we have the life of Christ in the Gospels. Then we have church history in the book of Acts. And during this time, there's a number of epistles or letters that are written. There are the Pauline epistles written by Paul, and then there are the general epistles written by others like Peter, Jude, James, and John. Now here, the book of Acts, we have the beginning of the church in Jerusalem. And then we have Paul's missionary journeys. And during these journeys, he wrote these different books. We have the prison epistles while he was in prison in Rome, in Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians. We have the pastoral epistles, which we believe Paul was freed from jail, and he wrote to Timothy and Titus. Then we have the book of Revelation. A key event in church history is the beginning of the persecution of Christians in 64 AD. This is the first imperial persecution. Nero blames the Christians for the burning of Rome in 64 AD. And Christians are used as torches to light Nero's garden. It's believed that Nero needed more room, so he had part of Rome burnt, and he blamed it on the Christians. Famous saying, the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. Christians were forced to live in the catacombs of Rome. And finally, Paul was beheaded in Rome about 67-68 AD. Another key, very important, was the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by Titus. This caused the scattering of the Jews and Christians around the world. And as a result of this, Christianity is spread throughout the Roman Empire. There was the first Jewish revolt, and resulted in Vespasian coming, and then he had to go back to Rome to become emperor, and Titus was left to destroy Jerusalem. A key event. A key writer, person at this time, was Josephus. He was a Jewish historian born about 37 AD. During the first Jewish revolt, which was from 66 to 70 AD, he was captured and taken to Rome, where he wrote the Jewish Wars about the first Jewish revolt, the antiquity of the Jews from the creation to the fall at Masada, and against Ephraim, who defended Jews against pagan slander. He gives valuable information about the New Testament and early church background. Here we have the writings of the Apostolic Fathers or early church fathers. From the ones I just mentioned, we have the epistles of Clement of Rome, the letters to the Corinthians. We have the 7 epistles of Ignatius to the Smyrnians, Polycarp, the Ephesians, Magnesiums, Philadelphians, Tertullians, and Romans. Then we have the epistle of Polycarp. We have the martyrdom of Polycarp. The Didache, some of the earliest teachings of the early church fathers. This is a key writing. Then we have the epistle of Barnabas, the shepherd of Hermas. Both of these are in right next to the New Testament. In other words, some even consider these to be part of the New Testament. The epistle of Ignatius and the fragments of Papyrus. These are some of the key writings of the early church fathers. The last persecution was under Diocletian, and it was the worst, and that was in around 303 AD. A key discovery was the Nag Hammadi Library, or Gnostic Gospels. They were discovered in 1945 near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. There were 12 leather-bound papyrus codices sealed in a jar. The most famous of these is the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 sayings of Jesus. They are now housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, Egypt. And these tell us a lot more about Gnosticism and what they believed, these Nag Hammadi texts. We now come to the third part in church history. First, we have Pentecost, the birth of the church in the apostolic age. Second, we have the time of persecution of Christians. And now we come to the third, the political union of church and state. This is roughly 313 to 476 AD. Constantine's victory over Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge resulted in his conversion to Christianity in 312 AD. It was said that Constantine saw this vision of a cross in the sky, which some think was a meteorite. And he said, "By this sign we shall conquer." And so they painted crosses on all their shields and went out into battle and won the battle. Constantine issues the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which stopped the persecution of the Christians. Constantine the Great becomes the head of the church. And here is a coin with a picture of him on it. So we have the political union of the church and state with Constantine. In 323 AD, Constantine becomes the sole emperor, and he moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. Here is a summary of the key church councils. We have the very first Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. They gave us the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed. Then we have the Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, which called the question of Christ's deity. Athanasius versus Arius. Is Jesus God, or is he just a man? Then we have the Council of Chalcedon in 451, that Jesus is indeed perfect God, yet a perfect man. Then we have a summary of all these earlier councils, help to clarify who was Jesus, Christology. The conclusion that these councils reached was Jesus was fully human, yet fully divine or God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Another very important great leader of the church was Saint Augustine of Hippo, lived from 354 to 430 AD. He wrote Confessions and The City of God. These were one of his two key works, plus he wrote many other works. He was a great theologian and formed the doctrine of the church. Another key leader was Jerome, 345 to 430 AD. And what he did was he translated the Old and New Testament into Latin, called the Vulgate. He was famous for translating this Vulgate, a Latin translation of the Bible, which is the official Bible of the Roman Catholic Church. Now we want to review here. We have church history. We have the beginning at Pentecost. We have the Apostolic Fathers. Then we have a great persecution of the church, the early church fathers. Then we come to the end of persecution with Constantine, political union of church and state. And then our fourth division here, we have the rise of the Pope's power and prosperity from 476 to 1517 AD. The Pope's rise to power fills the vacuum of the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Kings must get their approval from the Pope. This begins with Pope Gregory the Great. Then there was a spirit of revival of new monastic orders. There was the Order of Saint Benedict, monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy, started by Benedict of Nursia in 529 AD. The Cistercians, founded by Robert of Mulsing in 1098, to return to the literal observance of the rule of Benedict. Bernard of Clairvaux was the most influential Christian of his day, around 1090 to 1153 AD. And then we have Francis of Assisi, 82 to 1226 AD. He turned his back on worldly goods. These were the key leaders of the monastic order. Mendicants or friars are members of religious communities under monastic rule, but instead of staying in the monasteries, they emphasize public missionary works like preaching, teaching, while taking vows of poverty and chastity and obedience. Francis of Assisi, he turned his back on worldly goods and founded the Franciscans. This is 1182 to 1226 AD. Then we have Dominic of Asma in 1170 to 1221, founder of the Dominicans, an order of preachers. Another major event was the rise of Islam. Muhammad was born around 570 AD and retired to a cave where supposedly the angel Gabriel commanded him to be the true prophet of Allah. He was driven from Mecca. He fled to Medina in 622, where he raised an army and came back and conquered Mecca. They went on also to conquer Arabia, North Africa, Palestine, Persia, and Asia Minor. Muhammad's successors are called caliphs, meaning successors. Their main belief is there is but one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. We want to go back now to 1800, when Charlemagne, known as Charles the Great, at a mass on Christmas Day in 1800 in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as emperor, which revived the Byzantine emperor of Constantinople. He helped define Western Europe and the Middle Ages. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. We now come to the Great Schism that split the Eastern Church from the Western Church. There have been growing tensions between the Eastern Church and the Western Church since the 4th century. In 1054, this is the date for the beginning of the Great Schism of the Western Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and climaxed with the sacking of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade in 1204 AD. Inquisitions, sort of a bad part of church history. The Episcopal and Papal Inquisitions evolved to combat the popular rise of the Cathars and Waldensians. The medieval Inquisition was a special court with powers to judge intentions and actions considered heresy by the Roman Catholic Church. There was an investigation, a trial, torture, and punishment. Punishment was carried out by civil authorities. Pope Innocent IV in 1252 issued a papal bull, ad extremata, that authorized torture by inquisitioners. Many inquisitioners were Dominic monks. The most famous Inquisition was the Spanish Inquisition. The same king and queen that sent Columbus to the New World, Ferdinand II and Isabel I, carried out the Spanish Inquisition, which was not under papal control as earlier ones, but under direct control of the monarch. Because of persecution, many Jews converted. Ferdinand II started the Inquisition to stop false conversion by Jews to Christianity. Later it was used to stop the spread of Protestants. List of indexes were produced listing prohibited books, especially any Bible translations into the vernacular. The Crusades, another low point in church history. There were 9 major crusades to take back the Holy Land. The first crusade was in 1095 to 1099. There was the siege of Jerusalem. There was a crusade also of 1101. The second crusade, 1147 to 1149. The third crusade, 1187 to 1192. The fourth crusade, 1202 to 1204. The Albigensian crusade. The children's crusade. Then we have the fifth crusade, 1217 to 1221. The sixth crusade, 1228 to 1229. The seventh crusade, 1248 to 1254. The eighth crusade, 1270. And ninth crusade, 1271 to 1272. At the same time, we had the rise of universities. Modern Western universities had their origins in the medieval church. They began as cathedral schools and eventually became partially separated from the cathedrals and then formed their own institutions. The earliest being the University of Paris in 1150 and the University of Oxford in 1096. Thomas Aquinas lived from 1225 to 1274 AD. He was the greatest scholastic theologian of the Middle Ages. His most famous book is Summa Theologica. In 1270, the Bishop of Paris, and later became the Bishop of Oxford, condemned his teaching, which used reason, which went against Augustine. 50 years later, he was made a saint. We now come to the Renaissance. The Renaissance, 1399 to 1599, was a period of great cultural change and achievement. Famous artists Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Da Vinci. This is the time when St. Peter's Basilica was built. One important man was Erasmus of Rotterdam, 1467 to 1536. There was a renewed interest in classical studies. The study of Greek and Hebrew led to the study of the Bible in the original languages, paving the way for the Reformation. Erasmus of Rotterdam in Holland, one of the greatest humanists, prepared the first edition of the Greek New Testament, which was printed in 1516 at Basel. He wrote best-selling satires, the Colloquies and Praise of Folly. The Renaissance renewed interest in the classical studies of the New Testament written in original Greek. Erasmus prepared the Greek edition of the New Testament, which is the basis for the Textus Receptus. The invention of the printing press in 1455 was made by Gutenberg. The first book printed was the Bible. The printing press was the key to the spread of the Reformation. We want to look at the pre-Reformation leaders. There was Peter Waldo and his followers, the Waldensians, in 1175. We have William of Ockham in 1290 to 1349 AD. He called for reform in the Roman Catholic Church. He rejected papal authority. He was a skilled writer. Today we still use the principle named after him, Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation, is usually the best explanation. Then we have John Wycliffe, born in England in 1324. He translated the Latin Bible into English in 1388. He opposed the Pope in paying taxes and in doctrine. He is called the morning star of the Reformation. Then we have John Huss, followed much of John Wycliffe. And at the Council of Constance, he was condemned, and then he was burned at the stake in 1415. Peter of Prague was also burned at the stake. Savonarola, 1452 to 98, was an Italian preacher of reform who denounced the Pope, was excommunicated, and then executed. We now come to the Protestant Reformation that started in 1517. Martin Luther was born in Germany on 1483 AD. On October 31st, 1517, Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. Pope's bull of excommunication. Luther burns the bull. A bull is an official letter from the Pope. He did this in 1521. Martin Luther does not recant at the Diet of Worms in 1521. Worms is a city in Germany. Luther declares, I cannot and will not recant, for it is neither safe nor right to act against one's conscience. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. God help me. Amen. Luther is taken away to Warburg Castle, where he translates the New Testament into the German language. Luther returns to Wittenberg to lead the Reformation. Followers of Luther are called Lutherans. There are three great principles of the Protestant Reformation. Number one, the Bible is the final authority, meaning not the Pope. We are saved by grace through faith, not works. 3, the priesthood of the believers. We can pray directly to God instead of going to a priest. These are the three great principles. Bible final authority, saved by grace through faith, not by works, and the priesthood of the believers. John Bunyan, 1628 to 1688, was a Puritan who wanted to reform the Church of England. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress while he was in prison for preaching without a license. The first part was published in 1678 and the second part in 1684. He also penned Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, The Life and Death of Mr. Badman, and The Holy War. He was imprisoned twice. Besides the Bible, Pilgrim's Progress is the most read and sold book. Many translations of the Bible appeared in English. We have the first one, William Tyndale, New Testament in 1525. See William Tyndale's Gallery and the Tyndale Society. But he's the first one to take the Bible from the original Greek and translate it into English. And most of the other Bibles are translations that we see here are the result and mainly the work of William Tyndale. Miles Coverdale in 1535, he did the Old Testament. Then we have the Matthew Bible, 1537. We have the Great Bible of 1539, which is a revision of the Matthew Bible by Coverdale. Then we have the famous Geneva Bible of 1560, which became very popular with its Calvinistic notes. And this was the Bible used by the Pilgrims. Then we have the Bishop's Bible of 1568. Then we have the Reims Douay Bible from Latin Catholic version. Then we have the King James Bible, 1611. This was requested by the Puritans, but the Geneva Bible remained more popular for another 50 years. Because of the Protestant Reformation, we have a counter-Reformation by the Roman Catholic Church. Ignatius of Loyola founded the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, in 1540. Their first and greatest missionary was Francis Xavier, 1502 to 1552, who worked in India, Indonesia, and Japan. The Council of Trent, called by Pope Paul III, it met for 3 sessions, 1545, 1551, 1562. In 1564, the Tridentine Index was published, which listed books Catholics were forbidden to read, which was kept until 1966. Henry VIII became the defender of the faith against Martin Luther, but when the Pope delayed in granting him a divorce, he split from Rome. Cardinal Wolsey, in the great public display in London, had all the books of Luther burned. King Henry got Parliament to pass the Bloody Act that made Protestantism illegal and punishable by death. When Mary, the daughter of Henry, and Catherine ascended to the throne, she tried to return England to Catholicism. The Bloody Act was reinforced, resulting in many Protestant leaders being cast into prison, and over 900 of them burned at the stake, including Thomas Cranmer, Bishop Latimer, Ridley, and Hooper. Historians call her Bloody Mary. The 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics from 1618 to 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 ended the 30 Years' War. Pope Innocent X renounced the treaty in 1651, but the Catholic armies were too exhausted to continue fighting. The Age of Reason in the 17th century. We have science versus the church. Galileo Galilei came into conflict with the Roman Catholic Church over the Copernican astronomy. Galileo published Synodus and Nuncius in 1610, describing his observations with his new telescope, which told of 4 moons revolving around Jupiter, mountains on the moon, phases of Venus, and sunspots. The Bible clearly taught that the sun went around the earth, geocentrism, not the earth around the sun, heliocentrism. In 1632, he wrote Dialogues Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. Because of this book, Galileo was ordered to Rome to stand trial and then was sentenced in 1633. We now come to our 6th main point of church history. Let's review first. We have Pentecost, the beginning of the church, the apostolic fathers. We then have persecution of the church and the early church fathers. Then we have political union with Constantine, church and state. Christianity is now legal. Then we have the power and rise of the popes. Then we have the Protestant Reformation. And now we come to pietism and revivals in the 16th through 20th century. We have the Moravians, started by Count Zinzendorf. We have the Methodists, started by John Wesley in 1740. The Great Awakening. Then we have the modern missionary movement, started with William Carey in 1792, when he went off to India to evangelize them. We have Hudson Taylor goes to China to win them. Then we have David Livingstone exploring Africa. Some of the great missionaries of that movement. We then have modern revival meetings, the camp meetings, the Cane Ridge Stone and Campbell, 1801, starting the Church of Christ. We have prayer meetings, the 1857 Great Revival. We have the Sunday school started by Richard Blake. We then come to modern preachers of the 19th century. We have Charles Finney giving the invitation. We have D.L. Moody and Torrey with the Moody Bible Institute. And in the 20th century, we have Billy Sunday and Billy Graham. We want to go back now and look at the Great Awakenings. There were 3 Great Awakenings or revivals in the 18th century and the 19th. The first Great Awakening was in 1730 to 1740 in the churches. We have Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. We have George Whitefield and John Wesley's preaching. The second Great Awakening is from the 1800s to about 1830 among the unchurched. These were the camp meetings with Barton Stone, Charles Finney, Alexander Campbell. He started the Disciples of Christ. We have Joseph Smith, the Mormons, Ellen G. White starting the Seventh-day Adventists. The third Great Awakening in 1857, reaching the world. We have D.L. Moody starting the Moody Bible Institute. We have Ira Sankey's hymns. We have Mary Baker Eddy Christian Science. We have the Salvation Army. We have the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Social Gospel. We want to look at the modern tongues movement, a little history of the Pentecostal movement. They emphasize speaking in tongues, healing, holy laughter, word of knowledge, and visions. The birth of Pentecostalism was at the Azusa Street Revival in L.A. in 1906, which continued until 1915. William Seymour was the guest speaker. Most of the leaders formed their own churches. The Church of God in Christ formed in 1907. And the Assemblies of God and the United Pentecostal Church formed in 1914. 2 major types of Pentecostals, the Trinitarian and the Oneness. This mainly deals with the baptismal formula. Oneness baptizes in the name of Jesus only, while the Trinitarian baptizes in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Along with the growth of the church was the growth of modern-day cults. Most of them go back to the 19th century and early 20th century. We have the Seventh-day Adventists. Miller claimed that Christ would return in 1844, and then he didn't return, and so he said I'm a year off, and it must be 1845. And after 1845, there was a great delusion when Christ did not show up and return. Ellen White said that Christ did come in 1845, but into the holy sanctuary. Christ could not return to earth because they had not kept the Sabbath day. The church must be on Saturday. That's when we should worship. Her writings became the basis of their doctrine. In recent years, some have emphasized the Bible over her writings. Another cult is the Mormons, or the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith was born in 1805. In 1820, he sees his first vision. His second vision in 1823. The angel Moroni comes to him and tells him where there is a book with gold plates. The Book of Mormon is supposedly a translation of these gold plates that tell about the Indians in America who are said to be the 10 lost tribes of Israel and how Christ appeared to them after his resurrection. There's no archaeological evidence at all for this. Next we have Brigham Young took over after Joseph Smith was killed by an angry mob of 200 people who stormed the jail in Carthage, Illinois in 1844. Young led the rest of the Smith followers across the country, where they arrived in Salt Lake City in 1847. The Religious Society of Friends is commonly called Quakers, founded by George Fox in the 17th century in England. Their central concept is inner light, the Spirit of Christ within. Fox wanted to directly experience God. This is mysticism. Because many would shake or tremble with emotions during meetings, they were labeled Quakers. At the top of Pendulum Hill, George Fox had a vision of people gathered to the Lord in victory over Satan. Fox then began to preach to thousands in the open air. We now want to look at two main Protestant views: covenant theology and dispensationalism. Covenant theology is a prominent feature in Protestant theology, especially in churches such as the Reformed churches, the Presbyterian churches, and some Methodist and Baptist churches. John Calvin was the first to organize God's salvation's economy under the categories of covenant theology. The other main Protestant theology is dispensationalism, started by John Darby. Dispensationalists believe in the rapture of believers to heaven, 7 years of tribulation, the return of Christ, then 1,000 years reign of Christ, judgment, and a new heavens and new earth. Many evangelicals and fundamental Christians believe this way. Dispensationalism, usually emphasizing the end times of when the end will be. We have John Nelson Darby, born 1800 to 1882. He founded the Plymouth Brethren religious denomination. Darby publicized his beliefs in C.I. Scofield's Reference Bible, which became very popular. He also organized Bible events into a number of dispensations. Louis Sperry Schaeffer, 1871 to 1952, was an evangelical and Bible preacher. He was influenced by C.I. Scofield and founded his own Dallas Theological Seminary in 1925. It has become the flagship of dispensationalism in America. Some of the notable teachers of dispensational law are John F. Walvern, Charles Ryrie, D. Dwight Pentecost. Dispensational is very popular and is seen by the Left Behind book series and movies. We now come to postmodernism in the 21st century. Let's review. First, we have Pentecost, the beginnings of the church. In the book of Acts, the apostolic age. Then we have persecution of the early Christians. Then we have political union of the church and state with Constantine, making Christianity legal. Then we have the rise and power of the popes. Then we have the Protestant Reformation. Then we have pietism and revivals. And now we come to postmodernism. Darwin, who wrote The Origin of the Species in 1859, brought forth the theory of evolution. We also have here the ecumenical movement, the World Council of Churches in 1948, and the Vatican Council II in 1962 to 65. Modernism versus fundamentalism. In 1922, Henry Emerson Fosdick, a liberal Baptist preacher at the First Presbyterian Church in New York, delivered his sermon, "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" highlighting differences between the liberal and conservative Christians. The end of this modern fundamentalist controversy was marked by J. Gresham Machen, and a number of conservative Presbyterian theologians and clergy leaving the denomination in 1936 to establish the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. Key issues: the social gospel. What would Jesus do? The key book, In His Steps, written by Charles Sheldon in 1897. 2, we have higher criticism. The JEDP theory by Julius Wellhausen, 1883, where he sees the Pentateuch as written by 4 different authors. Then we have ecumenicalism. We have the Federal Council of Churches in 1908. Evolution. We have the Scopes Trial, William Jennings Bryan, 1925. The result, all major denominations were split over this issue of modernism and fundamentalism, except the Southern Baptists. The roots of American fundamentalist beliefs can be traced to the Niagara Bible Conference of 1878 to 1897, and in 1910 to the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, would condense these beliefs into the 5 fundamentals. The key 5 fundamentals that fundamentalists believe is, number 1, the inerrancy of Scripture. 2, the virgin birth of Christ. 3, the substitutionary atonement of Christ's death. 4, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And 5th, the historical reality of Christ's miracles. The Fundamentals was a series of 12 books published from 1910 to 1915. In 1919, 6,000 met in Philadelphia for the World Conference of Christian Fundamentalists. Key speakers were W.B. Riley, R.A. Torrey, and Louis Schaeffer. The Scopes Trial, 1925. Due to the sheer publicity of this issue, many well-known people stepped up to be part of this trial held in Dayton, Tennessee. William Jennings Bryan, who brought about the Butler Law, decided to be the prosecutor for the trial. Clarence Darrow and Dudley Field Monroe were high-profile attorneys that wanted to represent Scopes in the trial. This was a key trial. It was evolution versus creation. It was the Bible versus science. The biggest religious-related trial of the 20th century. Charles Sheldon, born 1857, died 1946. His most famous book is In His Steps. And in that book, the famous principle he brought forth is, what would Jesus do? Whatever the situation you're in, or crisis, or whatever, what would Jesus do? He's the leader of the social gospel movement. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German Lutheran pastor. He was a theologian and a dissident anti-Nazi and founder member of the Confessing Church. He called for a religionless Christianity, which has become widely influential. His most famous book is The Cost of Discipleship, and it's considered a modern classic. Bonhoeffer became known for his resistance to the Nazi dictatorship. He strongly opposed Hitler's euthanasia program and genocidal persecution of Jews. He was involved in plans with members of the German Military Intelligence Office to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He was arrested April 1943 by the Gestapo and was executed by hanging in April 1945 while he was imprisoned at a Nazi concentration camp. His life and example has been inspiring for us today. J.R.R. Tolkien. He is the author of the classic fantasy works The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And these have been made into the movies and have become even more famous today. He was friends with C.S. Lewis and helped him come back to Christianity. C.S. Lewis lost his religion, went away from religion, and Tolkien helped bring him back. C.S. Lewis was born in 1898 and died in 1963. He's best known both for his fictional works, especially the Screwtape Letters, the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Space Trilogy. His nonfiction, Christian apologetics, most famous is Mere Christianity, Miracles, and the Problem of Pain. Now they have made a series of movies based on his Chronicles of Narnia. He turned away from God, and then finally came back to God when he was 32 years old with the help of J.R.R. Tolkien. Martin Luther King Jr., 1929 to 1968. He was an American clergyman and prominent leader in the African-American civil rights movement. He is best known for his role in the advancement of civil rights using nonviolent civil disobedience. As a Baptist minister, he led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957. King's efforts led to the 1963 March on Washington, where King delivered his very famous speech, "I Have a Dream." There he established his reputation as one of the greatest orators in American history. Mother Teresa, born 1910, died 1997. She was an ethnic Albanian Indian Roman Catholic nun. And she stated, "By blood I'm Albanian. By citizenship an Indian. By faith I am a Catholic nun. As to my calling I belong to the world. As to my heart I belong entirely to the heart of Jesus." Mother Teresa founded the Missionaries of Charity, a Roman Catholic religious organization. And pictured here, she's receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom at the White House in 1985. Liberation theology. The term was coined in 1971 by the Peruvian priest Agustín Gutiérrez, who wrote one of the movement's most famous books, A Theology of Liberation. It is a Christian response to the conditions of the poor, especially in Latin America, because of the unjust social structures. The theologian puts emphasis on the dignity of the poor. The Second Vatican Council. On October 11th, 1962, Pope John the 23rd opened the Second Vatican Council, the 21st Ecumenical Council of the Catholic Church. One main change was the Mass can now be said in the vernacular as well as the Latin. The World Council of Churches. The World Council of Churches, WCC, is an international Christian ecumenical organization based in Geneva, Switzerland. There are 340 churches with 157 members. After the success of the Edinburgh Missionary Conference of 1910, chaired by John Mott, church leaders in 1937 agreed to establish a World Council of Churches based on the merger of the Faith and Order Movement and Life and Work Movement organization. Its official establishment was deferred with the outbreak of World War II until 1948. Delegates of 147 churches assembled in Amsterdam. Subsequent mergers were with the International Missionary Council in 1961 and the World Council of Christian Education, with its roots in the 18th century Sunday school movement in 1971. The Fourth Great Awakening, the 1960s through the 70s. We have evangelistic crusades by Billy Graham. We have the Second Vatican Council. We have the Jesus movement, from which Calvary Chapel started with Chuck Smith. We have Dr. Martin Luther King with his Peace March movement. We have the Charismatic movement, TBN. We have parachurch organizations, Dr. James Dobson's Focus on the Family. We have Bill Gothard, Promise Keepers, Bill McCartney. We have discipleship ministries like Navigators, Campus Crusade for Christ, founded by Bill Bright. We have InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. We have the Religious Right, opposed to gay rights, abortion, and evolution. We have social ministries, Habitat for Humanity, founded by Jimmy Carter. We have Prison Fellowship, founded by Charles Colson. We have Samaritan Purse, founded by Franklin Graham. We have mega churches, all these in the Great Fourth Awakening. We have the time of the mega churches, huge churches. One example is the Willow Creek Community Church, pastored by Bill Hybels, outside of Chicago in southern Barrington, with a huge auditorium and huge multiplex there. Plus, there are many other huge churches. We want to now look at an overview of all the church history we've covered so far. You can get copies of these charts on our website, BibleandScience.com. We want to review now. We have the beginning of the church at Pentecost. We have the Apostolic Age. We have the persecution of the early Christians. Then we have the political union. That was in 313 A.D. with Constantine, making it legal for Christians to practice their religion, and united the church with the state. We then have the rise of the popes and their power. We have a great schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Western Church would be the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern, we have the Orthodox Church. We have Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Eastern Orthodox. We have another great schism in the West with the Protestant Reformation by Martin Luther in 1517, nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. Martin Luther founded the Lutherans. The Moravians split off of the Lutherans with Count Zinzendorf. Some other great leaders of the Protestant Reformation was Zwingli. From Zwingli came the Anabaptist movement. From also the Mennonites. Another great leader, John Calvin, who founded the Reformation Church, the Reformed Church. Then we have another great leader, John Knox in Scotland, founding the Presbyterian Church. Then we see another split with Henry VIII not getting an annulment, so he splits from the Roman Catholic Church, with Cranmer leading the way. And under the Church of England here, we have two main groups, the Puritans who wanted to purify the church of England. We have the separatists who wanted to separate from the Church of England, and they did, and became pilgrims that came to America. And from these separatists, there was several groups that formed. We have the Congregational Church. Mainly think of the Pilgrims. We have the Baptists with Roger Williams in Rhode Island. And we have split-offs from the Baptists. We have the Church of Christ. We have William Miller, who claimed Christ was coming back in 1845. We have the Seventh-day Adventists who split from that. Then we have another group, Methodists, John Wesley founding the Methodists. And a split off from the Methodists is the great Pentecostal movement. The Roman Catholics have several orders. We have the Francis of Assisi, the Dominicans, and the Jesuits. Then we have a whole, trying to get them all back together again, the World Council of Churches. So this gives you a whole overview of church history and where some of the different denominations have come from. We now have some questions we want to review. The birth of the church occurred during what? Was it Christmas, Pentecost, Easter, Passover? The answer is Pentecost. That's when the church started in Acts chapter 2. Okay, here's another question to put in order the events in church history. Number one, we have the last persecution of Diocletian. That was in 303 AD. We have Saul's conversion. That will be number one. We have the destruction of Jerusalem. That was in 70 AD. We have 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans was written. That would be during his missionary journeys. Then we have Constantine was converted and took over the empire. That was in 312 AD. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians was written before 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Then we have the prison epistles. And then we have Nero blamed Christians for the burning of Rome. This was in 64 AD. Who was not among those of the early church fathers? We have Tertullian, one of the great leaders. We have Origen, great theologian. Damascene II, that's just a made-up name. And we have Justin Martyr. Who is this a picture of? Is it Nero, Augustine, Constantine, or Diocletian? Actually, this is a coin of Diocletian, who persecuted the great persecution in 303 AD. Okay, we have a true-false. The First Council of Nicaea strongly agreed with the Arians. That is false. They did not agree with the Arians. Who did they agree with? Extra credit, Athanasius. Another true-false. The early councils helped to clarify who Jesus was. This is true. They wanted to establish who was he just human? Was he God, part human, part God? And they came to the conclusion he's perfectly human and perfectly God. We want to complete the following sentence, fill in the blank. The popes rise to power to fill the vacuum of the fall of what? It was the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Because of the political power falling, the Pope was able to fill in the vacuum. Who was the prophet who contributed to the rise of Islam? That would be Muhammad. A short answer. Who did the Holy Roman Empire rise under? That would be Charlemagne or Charles the Great. How many crusades were there? 9, according to this course. Some people may put less, some may add more. What are the 5 points of Calvin? What's the key word to remember? Tulip. If you remember tulip, we have total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. Name the 3 key beliefs of the Protestant Reformation. It was the authority of the Bible only, saved by grace, and the priesthood of believers, praying directly to God. And you put these events in historical order. We have Pietism. That was in the 16th to 20th century. The First Crusade, 1095. Postmodernism, the 21st century. The Protestant Reformation beginning in 1517 with Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. We want to match the person with the organization. Ellen White, she was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventists. Joseph Smith, founder of the Mormons. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, the Methodists. John Knox, founder of the Presbyterian Church. Martin Luther, founder of the Lutheran movement. And John Bunyan, a Puritan. We want to match the writer with the writings. The Vulgate. Who wrote the Vulgate? That would be Jerome. He translated the Old and New Testament into the Vulgate, the Latin. City of God, that would be St. Augustine. The Institutes, that would be John Calvin. The Summa Theologia is Thomas Aquinas. Galatians, that would be Paul. Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan. Match the event with a date. The 95 Theses nailed to the door of the Wittenberg Church. That happened in 1517. Galileo's Synodus Numicus, that was 1610. Muhammad fled to Medina, 622. The Edict of Milan, 313. Fall of the Roman Empire, 476. The Great Schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, 1054. These are the key dates to remember. Name the 5 fundamentals. We have the inerrancy of Scripture, the virgin birth of Christ, the substitutionary atonement of Christ's death, the bodily resurrection of Jesus, and the historical reality of Christ's miracles. Match the following. Martin Luther King. What is he known for? He's known for the famous speech, I Have a Dream. Gustavo Gutierrez is known for liberation theology. C.S. Lewis, he's known for the Chronicles of Narnia. J.R.R. Tolkien, he's known for Lord of the Rings. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's known for his famous book, The Cost of Discipleship. Charles Sheldon, he's known for the famous principle, What Would Jesus Do? Match the following people with their organization. Samaritan's Purse, that was founded by Frank Graham. Focus on the Family, that was founded by James Dobson. Campus Crusade, Bill Bright. Evangelistic Crusades, that would be Billy Graham. Prison Fellowship, that would be Charles Colson. And Calvary Chapel, that would be Chuck Smith. Congratulations, you have finally completed the Church History Learning Module. I'm Dr. Stephen C. Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies, and you get more information, some of the charts and information you can get at www.bibleandscience.com. And thank you very much for taking the course.